stop, never stop until I find the goal. I'll never stop, never stop, never stop until
Hi everyone, welcome to Solutio. I'm Colin Davis, and the websites are solutiopodcast.com, shadowtechalchemy.com, and melissamarimovie.com, as well as melissamarimusic.com. And you just saw our song, Shedding the Skin, the video that we used when we used to play live with the O1 Experience. By the way, o1experience.com is where you can find that music. And that was the band that Melissa and I had. We debuted in December of 2018, and we worked on it for about 4 years prior to that. And what you saw there is that those were the visuals that we displayed on a projection screen behind our performance. And the art comes from a Russian artist named Lucidius that you can find on DeviantArt. Just a magnificent artist, painter, amazing painter. And I think almost all the art there, almost all, was created by him. And that is really one of my favorite songs by the O1 Experience. Just so deep, so alchemical. And Melissa's performance is just so incredible. And so yeah, that's always been one of my favorites. Now, today I think I have my notes here, and I'm going to read to you a Facebook post that I put out a couple days ago, and about using conflict in relationship, about using conflict to evolve yourself, and how that when you're engaged in this inner alchemy like we are, a great deal of what you're doing is using conflict to evolve. And in fact, if you can't get through that aspect of it, I mean, that's part of the shadow work aspect, then there's nothing else coming to you. So that really has to be embraced, and we have to. I'll read this to you in just a second, and you'll get a feeling for how we do this. And there was two parts of the article, and I think I'm going to read you both parts, although I only posted one part. The first part was about using conflict in relationship, and then the other part was about beliefs and letting go of beliefs. Now, what else are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about complexes, father complexes, and other complexes. I might bring up Kohutian self-psychology, which is something that I'm not as familiar with as I will be soon. I mean, I know some basics of it just from listening to Robert Moore, but I've started reading and digging into it more deeply, but I do understand the kind of the basic idea of it, and I want to relate that to the complex theory of Jung. And we'll just talk and hang out, and then of course anyone that wants to post comments or wants to call in even later, you can always call in. The phone numbers are in the YouTube description, or they're at solutiopodcast.com, and that's something that we can do a little later. I don't know if anyone noticed, but I'm coming on a little bit later today. I came on at 7:30 rather than 7 o'clock. And the reason why is because I've noticed that for whatever reason, the people who are watching this show are not showing up until later. And so I think a lot of the good material, they're not getting it, and they have to go back and watch it later in order to get that material. And people do. they do that. But right, so now let's get started with this. Let me read you this article that I have here. Let me pull this up, and so you'll just have to. I'm not going to put the article on the screen. I'm just going to read it, and then you'll just have to just listen. So here we go. Regarding the practice of relational alchemy, the alchemical path that I am on and that my life is dedicated to is bounded by certain ethics and related practices. One of the primary ethics is our mandate to use conflict as a portal into self-awareness and healing. No conflict is random or to be merely blamed on another, but to be seen as the effect of ongoing shadow dynamics that are to be uprooted, analyzed, and metabolized. As we progress, we generate a tolerance for conflict and an acceptance of its eternal presence in life. The first stage of the great work is to be conducted alone, because it is here that we become familiarized with our shadow material and we learn to work with it to some degree. We do the best we can. Eventually, others show up and they give us the opportunity to further the work. We discover quickly what we are capable of. If we stay with the work, we eventually become capable of true alchemical relationships. Conflict is still present in these relationships, but the individuals are able at this stage to tolerate the cleansing fire of awareness that is being focused on the unconscious dynamics that show up. This all sounds very cool until you're there in the alembic with another alchemist. There you must perform according to your highest capacities. When you're triggered by the unconscious complexes that you are still in the process of discovering and metabolizing, until you reach a significantly higher level, it's natural to react, to project, and to blame. It's natural for our complexes to insinuate scripting into our egos that support their prerogatives. Reactivity is natural and to be expected. In fact, it is the prima materia that is necessary for the refinement we are engaged in. It's what we do with that reactivity that makes us alchemists. The alchemist is a magician, so we have maps, tools, and procedures that we work with. All alchemists use similar procedures, but they differ from one to another. During the reactivity of conflict, the alchemists are using their witness consciousness to study the reaction. They're taking notes mentally as the reaction takes place. They're noting the type of reactivity that is occurring, even if they cannot fully control the reaction itself. The fact that they are consciously analyzing the reaction serves to limit and control it, but for many years, until enough prima materia is transmuted, reactivity will not be extinguished by awareness alone. Then, after the initial fire of conflict dies down, the two or more alchemists begin to relate to each other from their magician mind. They recall their knowledge and the maps they have previously used to compare what just happened to what occurred in the past. They note changes and report any advances in their abilities to prevent or monitor the conflict. After every conflict, new realizations, new updates to their maps and models will show up, and they use the period subsequent to the conflict to mine their consciousness for this new material and understanding. In addition to this cognitive processing, they engage in personal emotional processing of the residual emotions, and they engage in relational repair behavior where they rebond with the other. Finally, they do a full cleanup of the container of relationship and analyze and process any residual projections and leftover scripts that were involved in the conflict. An after-action report is either written up, recorded, or conducted verbally between the parties in the days subsequent to the reaction. This work is hot. It's uncomfortable and difficult during the periods of reactivity and cleanup, but then we feel the results. After we've engaged in this process and fully metabolized the energies, we notice that our consciousness has been raised. we feel lighter, and also we feel highly stimulated by the epiphanies that have come to us during our analysis. We understand ourselves and the process more. We see clearly that we are making progress, and that gives us a real boost in confidence. We also feel that our relationship has become stronger, and at the same time, more flexible. Love has been created through the work, and that love is the elixir that heals the complexes themselves. So, let me get back to where I am here. And, all right. Wow, okay. So, yeah, so there you go. So, let me just kind of summarize it or restate it all again. What we're doing as alchemists, and this is really the, I'd say this is the, in fact, let me just, well, no, I'm going to keep on with this, and then I'm going to read this other one about beliefs, but it's kind of what I'm going to say there is the same as here, is that this is really the test of an alchemical relationship, and the test of whether or not someone has the capacities to engage in this process and really evolve themselves from the inside out, to really do that, to really actually evolve, because it's just studying psychology or studying spirituality or being around people that talk about it or whatever it is, or having it as an interest, consciousness, these kinds of things, or using psychedelics and all of this. None of this really evolves you. The psychedelics give you a perspective, which is, or any of these kinds of experiences, all experiences that are formidable give you some kind of a perspective that you can lean on and that you can use to orient yourself. And I guess you could consider that evolutionary. It is. But to really restructure yourself, if you consider yourself to have had a difficult childhood, if you consider yourself to be wounded in any way, to be a wounded healer in any way, because an inner alchemist is really just a wounded healer who's that's it. That's all it really is. And if you're interested in this because you recognize that you need to heal, that you need to, you need to heal, then you're going to have to do some heavy lifting, and just, navigating around this material, around conflict, around the shadow, around complexes, around reactivity, tiptoeing around it and all of that, that won't get you anywhere, right? Reading about it and talking about it and studying it and listening to podcasts, that won't really get you anywhere. That kind of orients you and puts you, where you need to start, but then you have to actually go down into that material. And, you can do that through, you can meditate and find material. You can just wait for life to show you, where you need to look. You can be in therapy and you can have somebody else helping you, go through old stuff and see what generates reactivity. Or you can use relational conflict to open the door down into the complexes that are the distorted complexes that are getting in the way of you accessing your highest purpose, your inner gold, or they're distracting you, pushing back on you, slowing you down, just putting you in cognitive dissonance, dissociation, whatever the effects are. You recognize that you're not getting your highest purpose is not being tapped fully and put into the world, and you're feeling that there's more to be done and that there's work to be done. You have that general understanding, but you're not able to get to it because of all this pushback and of all this distortion and all of this manager activity, you would call it in IFS, right? So you have managers that are trying to, keep the exile from being rewounded again. So all that's going on. So the thing that opens access right through the ego and down into those manager parts and the exiles behind them, or we could just say complexes, or in Kohutian self-psychology, this is your internal objects, right? To get down into that material, to that patterning, conflict with other people is the ultimate way to get in there. It's one of the best ways to get in there. We take all ways that are available to us, that show up in our movie of life. But using conflict with other people is a very high level way of doing this. And not only does it give you an opportunity to figure yourself out and to start to process the emotions that are down there, like I read in the article. First, you cognitively analyze your reactivity, your conflict. You're doing it as the conflict is happening. You're doing it as the conflict is happening. You're watching. Even if you can't control yourself, you're watching. And then when the conflict is over, you're comparing what just happened with what your prior understanding of yourself is. You're comparing your old maps with what just happened. You're going, does that match? Or do I need to add more to my map now? You're talking to your partner about this, and they're saying, okay, well, here's what's going on. Here's how I see it, and here's how I see it, and all of that. Of course, you're taking responsibility, which I didn't even mention, I just realized in that article. Each person in the conflict is 50% of it, no less. It's never any less than 50%. It's always both people. And this is something to mention, is that often what you have in a conflict, and I'm just going to go off track here and we'll come back. Often when you have a conflict, one party, say it's between two people, one party is got the sort of overt aspect, the overt behavior, the triggering behavior, let's say, right? Let's say it's the more aggressive one. Someone is more aggressive and someone is more passive. And so the aggressive one may be seen to be the one that started the fight, right? But what you realize after you study this for a while, you study yourself and you study the nature of your complexes, or in Eckhart Tolle's term, the pain body, you'll find that there were energies and subtle triggers going on before the conflict started in the passive one. So the aggressive one is there saying, okay, attack, but then the passive one was there pushing on the field to get the attack to start. So both parties are involved. And then the aggressive one might attack, and then the passive one will be victimized. But then the passive one can easily and often at that time or another time flip and become the overt aggressor and victimize the other person. And so you get a full circle, a full cycle. And you have the two egos, the two conscious minds of the people, and then you have the two deep states, the two shadows, the two pain bodies, the two complexes, or, tapestry of complexes going on underneath, right? So that's what's going on, just like it is in the external world. Just like you have when you get out of the superficial level of basic politics and geopolitics of who attacked who and all of that, you find out that that's just the cover story. what the newspaper or TV says about who attacked who, what country attacked what country, you find that's just the cover story, and that there was these ongoing shadow dynamics, shadow antagonism going on between the parties before that. And so it's the same thing with two or more individuals. And so when we're doing this cleanup work, we're taking complete responsibility for our side of the conflict, even if we're not fully conscious of it yet, and we haven't really found our side quite yet. We know it's there. And it's the other person's responsibility to remind us, remember, you're half of this. And if you say, yeah, but it just doesn't seem like I'm half of this because you're the one that attacked me and you're this and you're that, the other person has to say, you have to find your half of it. Where is your half of the equation? It's there. Find it. It's subtle, but find it. It's back there. And then once the two alchemists are pretty embedded in this ethic, and they have recognized that this is the way it works, and there's no getting out of it, and it's never one side or the other, and they've really embodied that, then this kind of dialogue can happen, and then the blaming can stop, because you have to get past the blaming and into the energetic level of conflict dynamics, of pain body dynamics that are going on underneath the surface. So you're engaged in that, you're doing that, and then you're going through this, and you're creating your after action report, I called it, and you're talking it through. And maybe you're not doing it at the time, 5 minutes, 10, 15 minutes after a conflict. Maybe you're doing it that night or the next day or 2 days later, but never more than that. You're never waiting. Probably you're not waiting more than 24 hours at the most, really, before you're really pulling this apart with the other person. And the other person has to be ready, willing, and able to do that. So it requires two serious people who can do that, and it's hard because the psyche wants to project, it wants to blame, it wants to throw on the problem onto the other person or onto some external thing, or maybe it even wants to say, oh, that's just how I am, get used to it, and whatever it is, make excuses, make rationalizations so that you don't have to go in there and analyze the situation and get in touch with the material below. And so this is where you find out where people are at in these kinds of relationships. This is where you find out, do you have another alchemist with you or not, right? And you can, it's going to be, you're going to figure it out, and then you're either going to figure out that the other person can do this, or you're going to find out where maybe you're talking the talk but you're not walking the walk. Maybe you're asking them to do something that you're not even really doing that well yourself. Maybe you're not that more evolved than they are. Maybe it looks like they're the one that's turning down the offer to evolve, to analyze. But maybe you have your side of it too. Maybe you're both really at the same level. So you have to take that into consideration, because that very often is the case. So, but this is the practice. This is how it's done. And so then you're analyzing and all of that, and you have to have some kind of maps. You have to be using some kind of map of the territory of psyche, of what's going on. How do these things work? You have to have some kind of psychological map that you're using. You're using Jungian psychology, or you're using internal family systems, or you're using, Kohut, or you're using Freud, or you're using whoever you're using, whatever your map is. I don't think Freud is getting you there with what we're talking about here. But Eckhart Tolle's simple understanding of the pain body is so elegant. There's no detail to it. It's not like what Melissa and I were doing, of just like really like pulling it apart and taking Jungian psychology and then adding integral theory and other stuff and really trying to make a really detailed map. It's real simple. It's like you got a pain body and they have a pain body, and your pain body likes to play with the other one. And it's responsible for the reactivity and the emotions and all of that. And then the ego is responsible for the blaming and the projection and all of that. And so it's the ego and the pain body. And it's just, that's it. That's all you got. And that's simple. And that's all you really need. I like that. If you want to learn about the Eckhart Tolle's pain body, you just put it into YouTube, and he's got all kinds of lectures on it or talks. And it's there's one chapter on it in his first book, The Power of Now. And there's 2 chapters on it, chapters 5 and 6, in his second book, A New Earth, it's called. I usually refer people to that one because I think it's a little bit more developed, and there's 2 chapters on it instead of 1. But this is a very elegant and easy understanding. It kind of, he calls the pain body a psychic parasite. And so that kind of demonizes parts of yourself. I don't really go with that so much anymore. But because that kind of just, you have to recognize that these, I like IFS for this understanding a little bit better. This reactivity and the conflict generating nature of your internal system is based on child parts that are just reacting in a maladaptive way based on how they were on, personal factors and epigenetic factors and how they were treated, and they're a child's level of understanding. And you don't want to demonize your inner parts, right? Even, you could call a child a parasite if you wanted to. Is that the best approach for thinking about a child? No way. And so you don't want to think about your inner parts as parasites. Although the behavior is that. The behavior is, there is a lot of parasitism in the behavior of these complexes. So it is turns out actually that parasitism is the most prominent relationship profile in the biosphere. So it's not abnormal or anything. But anyway, so you're using some kind of model. That's why it's just so important that everybody start, use one of these models. And I can only give you what I'm familiar with. But I have been on this path of inquiry into the shadow and into this domain for over 20 years and been doing it pretty diligently. And there's a handful of psychological or psychospiritual models that outline this that you can use. There's not that many, right? So Jungian psychology, I think, is the widest and deepest, but it's also very nuanced, and not all of it deals with this subject, of course, but it's very elegant, very beautiful, but it's very deep and difficult to get a full understanding of, to where you feel comfortable with the whole thing and you feel like you can actually base things on it. So so IFS, internal family systems, is way easier than Jungian psychology, even though I think it doesn't fully give you everything you need. This is why our friend C. Michael Smith, who is a PhD Jungian, uses IFS more than anything else in his therapy, right? Because it's just so simple. And so that is a model that anyone can just grab a book, grab Richard Schwartz's Introduction to Internal Family Systems, grab that book, or any other Introduction to Internal Family Systems book you want, or look at videos or whatever, and just get familiar with the whole thing. Start naming your parts, dialoguing with your parts, journaling about your parts, and start forming a relationship with your parts and start understanding their behavior and their perspective. And that's a very simple and elegant way to look at the complexes that are at the core of reactivity and unnecessary conflict. Or like I said, Eckhart Tolle's pain body understanding. There's a pretty simple model too. But you have to have something. You have to have some model. You can't just be like, oh, well, you can't do the work. There is, I mean, there's you can reach a limit pretty quickly actually with theory, and how far you can go with theory, because you can take all the maps of the psyche that you want to and study them all and overlay them all, and they still will not show you a really reliable, accurate picture of the psyche in all situations for all people. No. So theory can only take you so far, and then you have to just kind of improvise your way through it with whatever tools that you have. It's just where we are in this, in our evolution, in the science, in the psycho-spiritual science of inner development and of understanding the psyche. So, but you need something. You need some kind of reliable map that works. And so it's going to have to get yourself up to speed on some kind of system like that. So yeah, so now maybe, let me read you something else. Let me go to something else here. We'll read something else and then we'll talk about it. Let's go back here. This was part of my original, all this stuff, the way this stuff comes to me is just that life experiences give me epiphanies, and then I just sit down and just type out something. I can't just write every day like writers can. I can write pretty good and pretty clean, but it comes out when it comes out. And so this was a segment of that original writing that I pulled out because it kind of veered off. But this is on beliefs. And okay, I think I might rewrite some of this, but it says the alchemical path is for badasses, true spiritual warriors. You have to tolerate your beliefs falling away because your ego is identified with them. Specific beliefs are not objectively right or wrong. They are merely scripts that orient your life for the movie scene you are comfortable or capable of living in. When these scripts are challenged by the world or in relationship, it's very difficult to let them go. But the alchemist knows that they are subjective and transitory anyway. The same goes for past experiences that we have rendered judgment upon, making them true stories that we carry around. These stories and the memories associated with them are formed by actual factual experiences, but are not clear and accurate representations of what happened to us. They are stripped down, fictionalized versions of what happened to us that serve psychological complexes that help shape our realities. Our minds, bodies, and behavior become concretized by these scripts, beliefs, and fictionalized memories. We've all noticed how humans often look like their dogs, but we also come to look and act like our complexes. Jung famously said, "We all recognize that we have complexes, but in actuality, complexes have us." And behind the complexes are master patterns, archetypes, some very beautiful and some very ugly and shadowy, and it is these archetypes who the complexes are serving. They are the gods and demons that are being channeled by our complexes. And the beliefs, scripts, and memories we are running in our internal software are the voices of these gods and demons. So the great work to be done is to see this state from above, watching it occur in real time, getting enough altitude and emotional detachment so that we can bypass our reactivity, which is the energy that comes from these operations. This is what I've been just saying earlier. As we become increasingly aware of how our shadow dynamics work, our egos unplug from the circuitry and we become more human. Reactivity and slavery to inner scripting is by definition possession, demonic possession. As we learn to use the alchemical tools in the practice of the great work, we awaken to higher states of consciousness. We become less susceptible to relational conflict, and we literally exorcise our demons. And while the tools for doing the work are available and have been available, most cannot handle what it takes. They cannot handle the discomfort involved in using conflict to evolve. They want to avoid it, but they end up getting it anyway because their distorted complexes demand it. So they never actually can avoid conflict, but they prefer to blame instead of working through it. They don't want their projection crutch taken away, so they don't evolve. So that was kind of, there's some material that kind of veers into what we were just talking about with complexes, but I thought in there was something about John Lilly's, let me go back to where I am here, to John Lilly's understanding, in the province of the mind, there are no limits. This is a famous quote by John C. Lilly. John C. Lilly, if you don't know, was a friend of Ram Dass and Timothy Leary in the 60s, one of these psychedelic explorers. And he started, he was just an incredible badass, back to that term. And he's the guy that invented the isolation tank, where you float on Epsom salts or whatever it is in total darkness. John Lilly was shooting up ketamine and LSD and other things, and then going into the isolation tank and going to other worlds, going to other states, other dimensions, and then going back to those places again and again and mapping them, mapping the different levels and what he found in these different levels. Just incredible. And some of the stuff was just so ridiculously horrific and wacky, but that was John Lilly, and he said, in the province of the mind, there are no limits. These limits are beliefs which are to be, taken apart and transcended, and then to be replaced by new beliefs, which are then to be also taken apart and transcended. In other words, you're always operating with beliefs. You always have scripts. You always have narratives. You always have stories, right, that explain, what happened to you and what does it mean? Or what's going on in the world and what does it mean? What is my father like? What is my mother like? And what does that mean to me? And how does it relate to other people in the world? You have these stories, these scripts. Why do I like this particular idol, this politician or this sports star or whoever, this culture star? Why do I like this person? And you see, you have a whole narrative structure, a belief system, a ego script around that. But that is just a vehicle to get you from point A to point B. That's all that is. It's not there to be your lifelong belief of the way things are. You're not supposed to idolize somebody or, stick to you're not supposed to. A lot of people are supposed to stick to these systems, stick to these narratives for their whole lives. But not the alchemists, not the evolver people. These are the evolver people, the people who are pushing the cutting edge. And humanity always has to have some of us, right? And so for us, we can't do that. We have to just say, okay, my current set of beliefs, narratives, scripts, understandings, these are answering the necessary questions and situating me in the world right now. And over time, as I grow, as I mature, these will fall away and they will be replaced with new beliefs, new scripts. And then over time, those will fall away. And you have to get used to, like if you go back and anyone that's showing up now, watch the beginning of this show on the replay, I played the song Shedding the Skin by the O1 Experience, my band with Melissa Mari. And it's just amazing, beautiful, incredible performance by her and the lyrics and everything. It's about this process, shedding the skin, shedding aspects of your ego, right? Allowing ego death to be the impetus for evolution, for transformation, for the refinement of your consciousness. So that's what we're doing as alchemists, is we're using conflict as a doorway into our complexes. We're analyzing it and we're working through it. And then what I didn't get to in my earlier talk but which I did read in the article, is that after we get through the analysis part, then we get into the emotional processing part, right? And we process the emotions. We allow the emotions to come up. And if this is in both of my books, there's a chapter or a segment on what we call emotional processing that comes from John Ruskin, Emotional Clearing. We just didn't want to copy his word or whatever, but it's basically the same thing, except we're doing it not in meditation, but we're doing it when we're triggered by each other or in life. And then you allow the emotions to come up and you allow your ego to access them. And then you go, what are these emotions? What are these feelings? And you give them the full permission to come up. Somatic experiencing in a way, emotional experiencing, right? And that actually starts to move the repressed emotions that are associated with these complexes, with the pain body, or however you want to call it, with these parts. So we do the cognitive aspect of understanding what's going on, analyzing it and doing it between two people so we're both on the same page and taking responsibility for our side of the equation, our side of the energy field. And then we're processing the emotions below it. Sometimes we're doing that alone, sometimes they're doing it with each other, allowing that energy to move, right? And then we're also allowing beliefs to fall away over time, right? And our idolizations or idealizations of other people, right? You're really into this person, or you're into this philosophy, or you're into this church, you're into this whatever it is. And that gives you answers, and then it gives you a social identity, right? But those can't last, not for us. They have to be transitory. And so that's the work. That's what we're doing. This is the work. And so there we go. Now, let's see where we are in our program. Let me talk to you guys in the chat. I know Carlos was posting furiously. Thank you for this example. This and last week, I had the opportunity to compare my reactions from now and before. Although there's room for improvement, I'm happy that I have more awareness. Excellent. Yes, when I analyze slowly, I've been the aggressor and the victim. Nothing is black and white with awareness, at least. I feel I get second chances to improve, although I wish there was a magic pill. Yeah, no magic pill, just a process of alchemizing, of metabolizing and increasing awareness over the course of life. To resolve these internal conflicts, to resolve the internal conflicts, but it takes time and patience. I always think about how I think and try to integrate different models to my mental process to get a bigger picture and help myself. I can also see how different ways of thinking about the world and myself are more at the forefront of my thought process the more I practice things like TRE, which is trauma release exercises, meditation, affirmations. It's nothing concrete, more like an arsenal of resources. Exactly. This is your toolkit that you continue to build. Can you recommend IFS practical book? Yes, I will. I struggle to understand it practically. That being said, I've started the open focus meditation and I still haven't felt something, but will continue to do it. I'll comment on that in a second. And then, okay, yeah, that's Carlos. Let me I'll comment on Shelley in just a second. But so the IFS book, I don't want to get up and have to reach it, but okay, there's a book by Colin West, which is a very simple, almost children's book. It looks like it's got drawings in it and stuff. It's called We All Have Parts. And you can grab that book, and it's just very, it's actually not that simple. It's as simple and complex as it needs to be, so that you have a basic understanding of what the basic principles of IFS are. Not just the parts and what they do, but just about the self and I don't know if she has the 8 C's in there, but it takes you there. Then there's the book by Richard Schwartz, the founder of it, called Introduction to Internal Family Systems. And that's a small book, and that will take you where you need to go. He also has a later book, which has come out a few years ago, and it's called No Bad Parts. I haven't read No Bad Parts, but from what I understand, it isn't just a continuation, it is a recapitulation of the whole thing. So you should be able to learn the whole theory through the No Bad Parts book. But look on Amazon, look at the reviews, and see if that's true or not. I think it is. And then there is an author named Ion Farvahar. It's AION, like Jung's book, Ion, Farvahar, Farvahar. And his book is IFS Tips and Tricks, or IFS Practice Tips and Tricks. It's got an orange cover. It's like a $50 or $60 book, but it's kind of a Bible. And he, the way he writes, he's a friend he was a friend of me and Melissa's, and he writes very simply, and he talks to you like, he really tries to make sure that you really understand each concept and everything. And so there's that. So there's some IFS books for you. And then of course there's a lot of YouTube videos. I don't know, there's probably a lot of people who are, I would probably just watch, Richard Schwartz. I would say go watch interviews with Richard Schwartz. But a lot of times Richard Schwartz is actually kind of having to dumb it down a little bit. You might look for Richard Schwartz presentations where he's teaching workshops or something to practitioners. There's some of that stuff on there too. And then the last thing I would say on this, which applies to any of this stuff, is get yourself a ChatGPT account, right? The free one. And go into ChatGPT, the AI program, and just say, can you please give me a summary of internal family systems? Give me a basic summary so that I can understand the whole practice and what it's about. And it will do that for you right there. And then boom, now you have that. And of course there's the Wikipedia entry for it. So it's not hard to get introduced to internal family systems, especially with the ChatGPT. I mean, I was using Grok. It's the X platform's AI. But now I'm using ChatGPT. And now I'm even experimenting with using AI programs that you download onto your computer, and private ones and stuff. And so I haven't gone there quite yet, but I've been researching that. And with these AI programs, they can give you incredible depth, and they can really be great teachers. And but at the same time, they leave out all kinds of stuff. So you can't just ever rely on a ChatGPT answer for anything, and just think, oh, okay, well, I understand it now. But it will introduce you. or you can use it to crack things open and problem solve and all of that. Okay. So where is... Okay, Shelley says, love this insight. The passive one pushes on the field. I just had a conflict, and due to my lack of reaction, I saw myself as the victim. In truth, I was totally pushing on the field. Yes, exactly. You have your ego, your conscious mind, and then you have all these dynamics in the unconscious, and in there is some kind of a complex that is integrated with the other person. They have some kind of a complex, pain body, whatever you want to call it, part that's in there, and it can't talk with English, or it actually can talk in English. What it's doing is, during the reaction, it's fueling your judgments and your thoughts. So it is talking during the reaction. Before the reaction, it's insinuating little microaggressions into your language, into your posture. Your complex is changing your posture. It's changing your voice. It's putting itself into your body and voice and your breathing and everything, and it's coming up and it's telling the other person's pain body, the other person's complex, I'm awake and I want to play, right? And it could wake up and start pushing on, and then there's also a field action too. There's just like a field action reaction that's going on that's even below the level of these insinuations. And that you can feel that. When you become sensitive enough, you can feel that. And the other person can feel that when you really become sensitive enough to this. And so that can come on, a couple days before a conflict, or just a couple hours or a few minutes or whatever, however it works in you. And so that thing will be turning on. And if you usually play the victim side, you have a passive aggressive aspect of your complex that is wanting to get involved in this and getting this whole thing started. So the reaction will happen, the fight will happen, and then the feelings that come up when the fight happens, right? Like you see, it could be like anger, rage. It's always on top, and self-defensiveness. And righteousness, self-righteousness, and grandstanding. These kinds of things can come up, and just narcissistic displays. All this can kind of come up on the active side. One of the partners will be doing that stuff. And then the other one will be feeling abused. They'll be feeling shamed. Or they'll feel, in some cases, guilt. They'll be, guilt tripped, right? Or they'll feel fear, right? Shame, grief. They may feel grief. Grief may be part of the formula on the victim side, right? But both people have a little bit of each. And one person is doing more of the active and the other person more of the passive, but they're both getting fed one way or the other. And so when this happens, when you become sensitive enough to how this works, you have been shown the recipe, right? You've tasted the meal, right? And you've tasted the meal, and now you can go, oh, okay, what's in that? What's in that? I taste this. I taste this. It's like you can take a bite of a food, and then you can figure out what the ingredients are. So you can do that after a conflict. You can start to figure out what emotions, write it down, what emotions were on top, the active masculine side, and what emotions were below the passive feminine side. And in both people. The aggressive person, you might at first think, oh, well, they are carrying the active stuff, And then the victim, I'm carrying the passive stuff. But when you go through that layer, you'll find that the equal opposite is below that layer. So the victim will have the aggressive stuff below the passive stuff. And yeah, and then the aggressor will have the passive stuff below the aggressive stuff. So you go in there and you pull that stuff out. And you pull it up, and then you go sit down. This is the emotional processing, the emotional clearing. Then after the fight, you separate after a fight. And if both, it's the way to go with this is when both parties know what they're doing. Both parties have some vocabulary. Both parties have read the IFS book. Both parties have looked at Eckhart Tolle's pain body or whatever system you're using. They both know the terminology and how it all works. And so then, once it happens, it's like, okay, we're doing it again, there it is. And you may or may not be able to talk about it with each other right then and there. You should as soon as you can. And you should take notes. You can record it on your phone or whatever device you want to use. Melissa and I, we used this little white recorder, this little MP3 recorder. I got thousands of hours of conversations and stuff, working things out. And then I started using my voice memos app on my iPhone. But, and then I actually, people who have seen the movie, melissamarimovie.com, they will know that I was also recording video of a lot of stuff too. So I was documenting everything because this is what we were doing. But, so then you go emotionally process the material. I'm going to go sit down. I'm going to go in the other room. You go in the other room, and then you go sit with it, and you allow, the judgments and the thoughts are all running up here, and you just let them be. Don't feed them anything. Don't give them any more attention. Let them play out, but don't feed them anything. Concentrate your energy on your body, on your emotions, wherever they show up in your body. Concentrate on the emotions, whatever's on top. If there's rage on top, allow the rage to come up. Allow it to flush your face. Don't punch anything. You can, punch a pillow or squeeze a pillow or do something like that, or squeeze some kind of a ball or something like that, or whatever, just to expend some physical energy. But allow the energy to come up and flush through you. And then when the anger part has died down, start looking for the grief. Start looking for the shame. Start looking for the guilt. Start looking for the fear. The stuff that's below the anger. Or if that other stuff is on top, boom, just allow that to come up. And when you get to the passive stuff, when you get to the shame, to the grief, when you get to that, allow yourself to cry. And the more you can cry, the better. And we've talked about this before. Learn how to cry. Use this technique after you're triggered, because this is the best time to do it. And go and kick back somewhere. You can do it in the car even, wherever you have to do this. And then allow the emotions to get to the feminine side, and then cry through it. Right? Now you're reprocessing, physiologically processing these emotions. So that's it. That's what we're doing. That's how we're doing it. And let me see what you guys are saying. Let's see here. You bought the Colin West book in Kindle. There you go. That's perfect. That's did I start with that one? I think I might have started it with that one. C. Michael Smith told us about that one. He recommends that to his clients. Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome, Carlos. And I've gotten to the shame, fear, and grief. It's still, you will be able to cry, Carlos. You'll get through it. Especially when you're alone, you'll be able to do it. I think I started with that one. Yeah. Okay, so now, anybody else has any other comments, feel free to put them in there. Now let's see, where are we on? So I just kind of gave you, there's a lot of stuff right there. We just went through a lot of stuff. We talked about the whole alchemical path, like we always do. We talked about using conflict in relationship to evolve. I read you that article. We talked about letting go, shedding the skin of beliefs, right? And idealizations of groups and ideologies, and letting go of that stuff. We talked about the actual process of, we talked about the topology of complexes, and we talked about the processes of the emotional clearing processes, of how to clear the emotions behind the complexes or within them. So that's a lot of good material there. Now I'm going through my notes here and to see what we're going to go into next, because I started the program later today. I started at 7:30 instead of 7. So because I noticed that you guys show up later, and this is you get a better show if you guys are involved. Okay. Oh, I know what I got. I got some stuff for you. That was fast, but the information is dense. Yeah, it is dense. Yeah, you can go back and listen to this show again later. Right, okay, exactly what you're doing. Exactly right. So you can go back and listen later. And I talk about the same stuff over and over again. And that's why I really appreciate your comments from everybody. Because you guys, Carlos and Shelley, you guys allowed me to go into more detail and personalize it. And the more personal I can do this, the more personal I can get, the better, because then that really fleshes it out. It's more general when I'm just talking if I don't have a personal example. So now I'm going to self objects. Maybe I'll talk about that a little bit. Heinz Kohut, Kohut. I won't go into it too much. I still need to do a lot more studying on this. The idea is that you have these three modes of relating to other people. You have idealization, and you have mirroring and twinship. And so when you're very young, you're idealizing the parents, right? They're basically like gods, right? And they're your example, and you're projecting onto them. You're in transference with them, right? You're in the field, the transference field. You're in the projection with them, and you're idealizing them. And because of that, they are, when we go back to the idea of complexes like mother and father complexes, your mother and father complexes are coming online and getting informed by this projection field with the parents and what's in that field. And then, as you get older, a little older, then you go into the mode where you're getting mirroring. And mirroring is where the parent is noticing aspects of you that you didn't notice, and they are complimenting you or showing you or bragging about you and assisting you and giving you help and mirroring you, letting you see yourself through them. Right? So they're looking at you and they're saying, wow, you got these great qualities, and let me talk about them and let me mirror them back to you. So that really develops self-esteem. And then this is when you're developing your own identity and your own self, your own ego, then you're using this, then you're needing this mirroring. And then you have twinship, which is your sort of bonding, all the bonding dynamics. And you need all of these. You need all of these experiences, and you need these functions to come online properly. And if any of these are disrupted, if there's if there's a misattunement, or if there is a neglect, or if some of these needs are not met, there isn't enough of this happening, then you're going to be fractured internally on this. Your internal self-object, they call it. You have external self-objects. You have an external self-object. You have a self and you have an object. It's kind of I don't know. Some of these terms doesn't sound very empathetic, even though a big part of this psychology is all about developing empathy. But the term self-object, so an outer person is an object that you relate to, and then you have the internal representation of that object within yourself. You could call a complex. And so that complex is growing and being informed by this relationship. And if there's fracturing, or there isn't enough action, positive nurturance in that field during these stages, then you get pathology. You get psychopathology. You get fractured. You get wounded. And so what you have to do is you have to relate to other people, other self-objects in life that can basically form a replacement or patch up what didn't properly form in the family unit. So this is, if you're not getting a good father attention, you're going to get it from a woman is going to get it from a boyfriend, or a man is going to get it from his boss, or from a mentor, or from an uncle, someone else. Men and women can get it from all kinds of people, and it doesn't have to just be a boyfriend. And what'll happen a lot of times, or great deal of time, is that you will start finding replacement self-objects, and they will just kind of tend to repeat the pattern of the original mother or father self-object, or sibling self-object. And so you have to mature through these stages and start, and you will naturally pull in people if you're on the path. You will naturally, if the psyche is capable of doing it, and it isn't in everybody, but if the psyche is capable of doing it, it will pull in more and more mature people, and you'll eventually start getting all that all patched up, or you'll get enough. It's like, what was Winnicott's understanding of the good enough mother, right? No one had a perfect mother, but as long as you had a good enough one, then that's all that you needed to get your needs met, and then you can operate with what you got. And that's how we are here. We got enough to be we're not basket cases. Anyone that's on this show, listening to this, reading this kind of stuff, we're not basket cases. We're not living on the street, just totally addicted to drugs, suicidal, And those people were just, traumatized, and there's intergenerational trauma to the point to where, so much trauma and not enough natural capacity to heal. Put it together and you have what I was calling a basket case. Not a very nice term, but we're not basket cases. We're just wounded enough to have to work on ourselves, but not so wounded that we can't. Right? That's where we're at. So, and Robert Moore is the guy that introduced me to the Kohutian self-psychology, and then also C. Michael Smith, Mikal, because he was also University of Chicago and studied under Moore, and that's where Kohut was popular. And he also asked me to start looking into that and get an understanding of that. So I've been looking at that, and I'm really just at the beginning of the understanding of it. I'm really not. But I do have I read half of one book already, and I'm about to start another one. So anyway, I can't remember who I Am Her Eminence was, what your name was, who was it that was behind that handle. I'm so glad to hear crying is the act of release. Oh, believe me. Yeah. Look at either of our books, Shadow Tech or The Transforming Darkness. There's a segment on emotional processing, or go to John Ruskin's original book, Emotional Clearing. He talks about doing it in terms of meditation. Melissa and I talk about it in terms of after you're triggered, when you're in conflict in life. Anytime emotional content comes up where you need to cry, you need to cry. And if you need to isolate yourself, you need to go in the car, go in the room, in your own room, and have your own space or whatever to do it, then you do that. And it is true, though, that you can get addicted to these lower, like any emotional content. A complex can just keep running, and you can just keep on. It could just keep on, gassing you with emotional reactivity, and you can just kind of stay in it, and you can just cry yourself to death. But a lot of times that's not what's happening. What's happening is that you haven't been crying enough. You haven't been getting a good release of this. It's like when Melissa died, which has now been 14 months and something. I just now, about 2 months ago, stopped crying every single day, multiple times a day. But I knew this technique. We had been using this in our lives. We have been teaching it and talking about it for years. So of course, when I had to really use it again, I knew what to do. And so I just processed all this. I cried for, hundreds of hours, who knows how, I don't know hundreds, but every day for, let's see what it is. So I'm crying for every day, maybe 10, 15 minutes at a time, like 3 times a day. And then I'm just doing that. And then eventually it moves. Eventually I move through that stage. Now I'm finally able to recognize, and then I've talked about this before, the whole projection of the anima-animus projection that was going on between us, and the relational field between us, and then that gets broken when she passes, and then now half of my psyche is hanging out there, and I have to, because I was so relational with her, so intimate and relational with her, and then my psyche falls up, half of, my self object, we could call it, out there disappears. And now I have to pull my psyche back in again and go, who am I? And, I know women, actually, it's very well understood that women go through this because women are usually more relational and more dependent on the relational field. And when a husband passes, they can have a very hard time finding themselves again. Plus the fact that women are often just their personas, their social space in the world, at least traditionally, was more dependent on the husband. And so it's definitely hard. It's always hard for them to lose the husband, because not only is their relational field broken, but then their whole, identity and role in the world and everything is broken. But me as a man, I became initiated into my feminine, to a great degree through my relationship with Melissa. And so, so I had a lot of material hanging out. She was holding a lot of material for me. And then when she passed, that's out there. So I had to reintegrate all that stuff. So not only am I crying for the grief out, but I'm also kind of reintegrating my psychic field. It really feels like that, reintegrating my psychic field, and then going back to, oh yeah, I'm an individual again. I existed before Melissa. I met Melissa when I was 43. I already had a career as a musician and touring and running a studio, and I already had a life and everything before Melissa. I was operating before her. But then once she came in my life, my whole life became oriented around this solar mystica, my alchemical woman. And then she's gone after 12 years. And it's like, oh, okay. So that was going on for me, but I believe I successfully did it. I'm still crying over Melissa. I'm still talking to her every day. I'm still, ringing the bell on the altar, and I got her pictures up there. I talk to her every day. I'm still doing this. But I'm finally, and this show is actually helping me to be able to be myself and to do, basically continue on what Melissa and I developed, was all this psychospiritual work, and then now to put it out in the world without her, which I'm fully capable of doing, but the act of doing it actually makes me an individual again. So that's what's been going on with me. But the crying, is a huge part of the process, and so got to do that. But okay, back to Carlos. I've had to learn most of the positive self-esteem myself. I was always hiding and in fear. I forced myself to put myself out there as a matter of survival. Yeah, right, exactly. In your 20s, you got to push yourself out there in the world, and in your, when you get out of the house, and whether there's a survival impulse behind it or there's just an ego development impulse behind it, and social impulses and stuff. You have to do stuff in the world. You have to push yourself, absolutely. But thank God I'm learning English too. Yeah, and your English is excellent, really excellent. English to find information about self-help. My life would have been way different if I hadn't. So good, Carlos, what you did, not growing up with English in the household, and then you learned it before you were too old for it to get hard. Once you get, the older you get, the harder it is to learn another language. And I'm actually spoiled because being a primary English speaker, and I can go all over the world, and other nations are taking steps to try to understand English, to learn English, because it's really the international language now. And especially in Europe, because I've done a lot of touring in Europe, and I haven't been to South America yet, but I've been to Europe a lot, been to Japan and North America, but and so I can operate with English in Europe. And I have a lot of friends in Holland, for example. I can't speak Dutch to them. They're not going to mess around with Dutch, trying to limp around with me or anybody else. They speak perfect English, and they want to speak English. They like it. And so there's no real good opportunity unless you live in another country to really, but if you're in a Latin country and it's Spanish that's being spoken predominantly, and you want to evolve and you want to learn, yes, you're going to have to push yourself to learn English. And so you did that. And so that's fantastic. In a way, I don't want to feel like a victim. I think that might be one of the reasons it was hard for me to, that's natural for you as a boy and a man to, especially, we've talked about this before, Carlos, about, the Latin machismo culture. And that's only natural, and that's programmed into you. That's came from your family, and that came from your family line, and that's all around you and everything like that. And so the idea is, men have to buck up, and they have to be strong, and they have to, because that's true, basically. When you're in a more survival-based situation, like what was the case hundreds of years ago, for all of time, really, there's men who are expected to be warriors and hunters and providers because they have the physical strength and they have they have the actual brain for certain activities that women don't have. And so getting sucked down into crying and grieving and all of this stuff is not part of the male modality. But the thing is that people didn't even live that long. We live twice or even 3 times as long now as people from hundreds of years ago. Definitely people like 3 times as long as people from thousands of years ago, and twice as long as people from hundreds of years ago. And so, the what we call the first half of life, let's say you get we call midlife like age 35 or 40 now. But people are dying of diseases and all kinds of things, so much that a lot of people don't last that long in the old days. And so we now have a whole second half of life where we have the opportunity to develop parts of ourselves, to develop our psyches, to develop capacities that more ancient people just didn't have the ability to do. And then all the social roles and all that kind of stuff has changed. And the Jungians have pointed out, Carl Jung pointed out, that every man has a feminine side, an anima, and every woman has a masculine side, an animus. And traditionally, the first half of life, the woman's femininity is her ego identity, and her role in life is organized around feminine archetypes. And she has to be a mother, and she has to attract men, and so she's on the feminine side. And then a man has to go into the world and be a warrior or a provider, and so, he's got his masculinity on top. And that's natural for the first half of life. That's how But then when you get into the second half of life, then there's an opportunity for what they call the contrasexual image, the anima or the animus, to start to come online, so to speak, or to get integrated into the ego and into the whole personality. And men can develop what you could call the lover archetype, right? So men can become, if you're doing it right, if you're doing the process as Jung described it, and I think this is very natural and true, then a man who might have been more aggressive in early life will become softer and more compassionate and allow for more pliable in the second half of life, as he gets into his 40s and 50s and certainly into his 60s. And then a woman will actually start to get in touch with her warrior energy, her masculinity, when she gets into her 40s and 50s, 30s, 40s, 50s. When her kids are out of the house, when her mothering period is over, she will, often go through her midlife crisis, and then she'll find something to do in the world that is more about her and less about family and less about others, and she'll get into her own thing, and she'll start a career or do something else. That's happening all the time. So Carlos is saying it's hard to get in touch with the femininity, yes, but a woman has to get in touch with her masculinity also. And then this is a sort of a huge problem in the household. And one of the things that leads people to get divorced is that original relationship profile of man and woman has switched to some degree, and they haven't figured out how to make that work. And so people go looking for others to try to bring back the old relationship profile. But also, though, with that said, even though that is kind of the archetypal example, there are plenty of women who develop their warrior function early in life for survival, right? Because coming from bad families and abusive situations, that women will turn on their warrior energy early. I mean, in their teenage years or in their 20s, and then they will develop that, and they won't really, their lover capacity will be kind of stifled. And so for those women, they actually have to do the same thing that men have to do, and that is they have to get in touch with their lover in later life. They have to allow the relational aspect, their femininity, to start to come in, and they have to become, and Melissa did this. Yeah. And then there are men who are more, because of their, they grew up around a lot of sisters, or, coddling mother, or whatever circumstances in early life, they were softer in early life, and then they have to develop their warrior in later life. So it doesn't go by the traditional way all the time, although that might be 80% of the time. But either way, the point is whatever archetype is more present in early life, and you could just say masculinity or femininity, or you can use Robert Moore's system and you can say warrior and lover. Or Toni Wolff she's the originator of the idea. And so whichever one is prominent in early life, the opposite is going to be needed to be worked with and brought online later on, or as soon as you recognize that it's an issue. So there you go. There's some more good stuff. And now it is 9 o'clock, and I think we're gonna go I think we're gonna go for another half hour. So what I want to tell you about now is I'm going to show you some stuff. I think I've already showed you this whole 4-quadrant thing. Ken Wilber's 4 quadrants, the 4 perspectives: first person, second person, third person plural, or mind, culture, body, society. And how cool that is and elegant it is to take any subject and put it into that model and really break it apart and have a holistic understanding of that subject. And so I've been doing this with the shadow, because that's my main subject. And it was in my last book, Transforming Darkness, just in brief. It's like a handful of pages. And now I'm working on a workshop. And you guys are, of course, welcome to attend the workshop. And there will be an online version, and then there will be, in-person versions. And I may just do the online version as a warm-up. I don't know if I'll do more than, I'll probably keep doing them, but at first I'm going to do one to kind of test it out, and then to, use as a proof of concept, basically, to start doing them in person, because I'm going to start doing them around Austin and Central Texas. It's where I am right now. I was in California, but now I'm here. And so this workshop, though, is part of this workshop is this 4-quadrant system. The downside to the 4-quadrant system is that it's kind of heady and kind of complicated at first. It's very, very elegant and good, and I want to give it to people, but it's also, the kind of talk that we've been doing today on this broadcast is really, I think, the best kind of way to deliver information on the shadow. Is just this real kind of earthy, real stuff that's practical, that talks about your actual life and getting into conflicts and how to process emotions and all that kind of stuff. That's the best way, really, to talk about the dynamics of the shadow and shadow work. But there are higher levels of analysis and understanding that are also useful. So I'm figuring out how much of the complicated stuff I can put in there and mix it with the earthy, real, juicy stuff. But Now let's do that though. So I'm going to take you to a document that I'm working on, and I'm just going to read you through. Let's go over to that right now. Let me put that on the screen. Let's figure this out here. Let's put that on the screen. Where are we with that? Turn that off and turn this on. There. So now what you're looking at, and where's my little... I've showed you versions of this before. On the left, you have... This is the 4-quadrant system on the left. Integral theory, Ken Wilber. And, you know, the I, we, it, and its. Individual, inside, outside, collective. That whole thing, that's Wilber's system. And that translates, when you're talking about the human being, that translates to mind, body, culture, and system. So the mind is your internal state. Your body is your physical body, your physiology, and your behavior. Your culture is all the information that we share with each other, our philosophy, our art, our law, and all of that. But then also, you know, all the current day cultural stuff and music and memes and all that kind of stuff. But it's also our values, our attitudes that we share with each other. Especially, you know, you have a society of a Judeo-Christian society, and you have a lot of shared attitudes and values and morals. That's all in the culture quadrant too. Plus, down at the bottom, it's the relational fields. Like we were talking earlier about when we're talking about the pain body and all of that. Relational fields, psychic fields between people. So that's the we quadrant, culture. And then the lower right-hand quadrant is the society that we actually build. We build institutions and schools and government agencies and monetary systems and all of that. And all of these 4 quadrants, the human being expresses itself through all 4 of these. And they're all interrelated. They are not 4 different separate domains. They are one. This is one holistic system that you can kind of split up into these different quadrants. And so typically, when you're talking about inner work, psychospiritual work, you're talking about the upper left-hand quadrant, your inner state, the inside of the individual. You'll see it says I, the I quadrant, and it's the inside of the individual. So that's the mind, that's the psyche, that's your spirituality, that's all of that going on. And so that's generally where we talk about shadow work. I mean, it's all shadow work really is. It's all upper left-hand quadrant stuff. Like if you look in the diagram on the right, you have the shadow of the psyche up there, Jung's shadow of the psyche. And then I just can go over the rest of it. On the shadow side, on the lower left hand in the we quadrant and the culture quadrant, you get cultural evil and the collective shadow, right? And then, you know, this is all of the nasty ideologies and all, you know, Epstein stuff and all of that. And then plus all of the mass formation psychosis, you could call it, and, you know, the collective shadow, as under Jung's definition. Wetiko, Paul Levy calls it. That's the lower left-hand quadrant. And then you've got, let me move my little thing here, if I can get this to work. There it is. And then you've got in the upper right-hand quadrant, you've got how does the shadow manifest in the body? Well, this is disease. This is illness. This is all the syndromes. There's like 1,000 new syndromes that everyone has. And then addictions and all your pathological behavior, the body side is in the upper right-hand quadrant. And then on the lower right-hand quadrant, that's your deep state. That's your shadow government. That's your corporatocracy. That's all the institutional corruption. So, so that's the whole 4-quadrant model right there. And then I'm basically going through this. Let me go back here. I'm going through this and describing it all, and then I'm giving you a whole rundown of all the we're talking right now. What we're talking about is the shadow of the psyche. So this is the upper left-hand quadrant of that shadow map. And I give you a whole rundown of the type of material, what is in the shadow of the psyche. What's in there? What's your shadow material? How do we categorize it? What is this stuff? And so I give you a whole long list, categorized list of shadow material. And then I give you a categorized list of shadow work practices. And I do this across all 4 quadrants. I give you shadow manifestations and shadow work practices in all 4 quadrants. So that's a very, very helpful system. No one else has done this before, and so I've been working on it for a while. And but it's kind of theoretical and all of that. But we're alchemists here, and we need maps, and we need to put together our own stuff. So this is for us. This is for the kind of people that are putting together their own stuff. Now let me get this out of the way, and let me go through this. So we're talking about shadow material in the psyche. What's in there? And so you have the emotional shadow. So this is your repressed feelings, your rage, your shame, your grief, your fear, your envy, all this kind of stuff. Repressed feelings, just raw feelings that are in there. And like when we were doing the emotional processing, when we were talking about that, we're just getting in touch with those feelings and letting those flow. Also in this category is chronic emotional triggers, right? Mood volatility, emotional suppression or numbing, right? We know what that is. Overwhelm or emotional flooding. Yes, we know what that is. Shame loops. Yes, we know what that is. Guilt fixation. Any kind of fixation on any of these emotions where there's a complex just turning this stuff. Fear-based reactivity, a fear-based complex. Yeah, this is all emotional shadow material. Then there's the category of libidinal energy shadow, like Freud's libido. Actually, Freud mainly talked about libido as being sexual energy, but then Adler and Jung and others, developed it further and said, no, it's all kinds of primal energy. So this is the domain of just pure energy, just pure drive. And so you got grandiosity or narcissism, hubris, ego inflation, that kind of material. And then you have aggression, power drives, and sexuality. That's Adler. That's Adlerian psychology. And so aggression, power drives, and sexual energy. Then you got your personality disorders. They go in the shadow. Your dark triad personality traits, your Machiavellianism and narcissism and all that stuff, and psychopathy, all personality disorders, borderline personality disorder, all that. Narcissistic personality disorder, that's in here too. You got your cognitive shadow. This is the stuff that's turning in the mind, in the head, distorted self-beliefs, right? Just think about that. Distorted self-beliefs. Body dysmorphia, right? Women understand that. Body dysmorphia, not seeing your body the way it actually is, actually seeing your body as more fat or more thin than it actually is, or criticizing it, right? Yeah, but with body dysmorphia, you don't even see yourself right. Inner critic dominance, right? We know what that is. Cognitive dissonance, right? So there's pushback. You actually can't see things about yourself or about others that you should be seeing, right? Shadow material, you can't actually see it. It's held in a bubble. It's in cognitive dissonance. Identity rigidity, you will not allow yourself to for your identity to shift. You would not allow yourself to let go of your beliefs and your identity and who you are socially, because to do so is talking about shedding the skin earlier, it's too difficult. Confirmation bias, You see your own beliefs confirmed in the world. You're projecting, black and white thinking, catastrophizing, basically paranoia, narrative defensiveness, this is all cognitive shadow material, right? Trying to defend your narratives, your stories, your beliefs. The psychodynamic shadow is next, right? So this is like Jungian, repression, suppression, or Freudian too. Repression, suppression, projection, displacement. I talk all about that. Repression is is the basic impulse to hold the shadow down into the unconscious. The Jungians have repression and suppression. Suppression is like mild repression, and then real repression is where you don't even know you have this material. It's so far down there. And then you project it out into the world. You see it in other people. Oh, Donald Trump's the one, or Barack Obama, or this or that person, or your mother, your father, your neighbor. They're the ones that are going to hold your shadow for you. You project it onto them, and then you get angry or whatever, and then you take action in the world to stop that evil. That's your displacement strategy. Denial, it's another way of saying cognitive dissonance. Idealization, right? This is golden shadow projection. This is where you're projecting, good aspects of yourself onto other people. It's like, you got shadow projection, and then you have golden shadow projection, which is called idealization. Self-object distortions, like we're talking about, Kohutian theory. Demonization or scapegoating. You can do that in groups. There's a whole other section for the we quadrant where I talk about group shadow projection. We're not going to get into that today. Rationalization, dichotomous splitting, that's us versus them. All this kind of stuff. This is all shadow dynamics. Parts-based shadow. Autonomous complexes. Carl Jung, that comes from Jung. We were talking all about that today. The pain body, we mentioned that today. It's all different ways of saying the same thing. IFS disowned parts, all same things. They're all different ways of saying the same thing. Archetypal energy shadow. This is like, for example, you go to Robert Moore's system and his whole king, warrior, magician, lover, and the shadow aspects of that. And you get inflated or possessed by these archetypes. And existential shadow, death anxiety, meaning collapse. You have a dark night of the soul, and then your whole, or identity diffusion, your identity's falling apart. And freedom avoidance or responsibility avoidance. These are ways of not going into the world the way you should, because there's existential fears, existential anxieties and distortions. And then you have your spiritual, psychological bypassing, we're calling it. That's a known term, spiritual bypassing. Awakening inflation, right? You think you had a psycho-spiritual experience, you took ayahuasca or LSD or whatever, and now you think you've awakened. Or maybe you just had some other kind of epiphany without drugs, and you think you've awakened, and now, your ego is getting inflated. Premature transcendence, similar situation. Emotional bypass, right? You're actually the reverse. You're not accessing what you should be accessing. Love and light avoidance, right? This is the New Age problem, the spiritual community or New Age problem. They never want to look at the dark side because they think that it will suck them in there. It kind of comes from Christianity. You never want to look at the devil or talk or think about the devil because he'll take you with him. And so, which is just not true. Maybe if you're at a lower level, if you're at a much earlier level of consciousness, like ancient societies where you probably may not have the ability to be able to metabolize the shadow, so you may have to project it. I believe that's the case. You have to project the shadow in 3,000, 4,000 years ago, even 2,000 years ago. You have to, because the psyche just is not developed enough to be able to handle it. And the ego is still developing. But now we have a lot more people that can process their shadow material, and they don't need to keep projecting it into the devil or projecting it into other people or just repressing and avoiding it. They can process it, and so they should. Non-dual bypassing, you're doing meditative techniques where you're getting into non-dual consciousness and you're getting high off of all this. And then you're coming back and you're saying, why are you guys all talking about left versus right and good versus evil and stuff? Everything is one. And but you're not getting that that's a temporary state that you can reach, and it's great to do that and to start to get that into your psyche and to have that experience. That's great. If you can do that through taking 5-MeO-DMT or whatever drug, or you can get it through meditation, that's great. But you have to realize that this is a duality-based simulation we're in here, and you have to learn the rules and learn the ropes and everything of duality. So that's life. And dissociation mistaken for awakening. Right, so same kind of category of stuff. And then we get into the shadow work practices. That's just identifying the shadow. So look at that. You can read through that, and then you can relate it to yourself and go, where is some of this in me? Where am I doing these things, or where does this show up in my life? And now the shadow work, and I'm still working on all of this, updating it and everything. So you have your foundational awareness, your daily mindfulness, sitting or active. Some people are going to be more on the meditator side. Some people are just going to be being active, like in a Zen way, in their life, always activating what it says right here: witness or watcher awareness stabilization. And hold on, I gotta adjust something right here. Yeah, you're saying the same thing I'm saying. Okay, great. Right, you're developing the watcher, you're developing the witness, you're standing above, and you're always analyzing and looking. Now, you're not always wanting to do that constantly. Sometimes you need to be in the work. You need to let go of analysis, and you need to be in what you're doing, right? You need to be in present mind. You just need to be in presence. And so those are both techniques that you're doing. And which I need to actually put in here. Emotional labeling practice. Yeah, that emotion came up. What is that emotion? What is that emotion? What is that? Name it. What is that emotion? Trigger journaling, right? What triggered you? What consistently triggers you? Self-inquiry questions like, what am I not wanting to perceive or feel? Right? It's like a primary question for shadow work, shadow awareness. Mood tracking, right? Becoming aware of the movement of your moods. Emotional integration. So you have emotional clearing, John Ruskin, which we talked a lot about today, or what we call emotional processing. Emotional trigger processing, right, exactly, right there, Davis Mari, that's us. And then you have inner relationship focusing, Eugene Gendlin and Anne Cornell, who he came up with the idea of focusing, and then she turned it into inner relationship focusing. And my friend Lauren just turned me on to that. I already had Eugene Gendlin's book, Focusing, that someone gave us when we were describing John Ruskin's process that we were doing. So it's very interesting. So IFS actually is very close to this inner relationship focusing system. Just put that in to the internet and you'll find that. Okay, depth processing. This is more on the Jungian side. Inner parts, labeling and dialogue, IFS style. Inner child work. I'm not going to get into that right now because we're getting late. Journaling, shadow-related journaling, dream journaling, expressive writing, These are all terms. Every one of these terms you can look up on the internet and you will get something on these. There's all existing terminology. This is not my terminology. A little bit is my terminology, not much. I've tried to put together terminology that is already out there in the field. And so you're going to get material if you put these terms in. Jungian psychotherapy, symbolic and archetypal narrative analysis, dream work, contrasexual integration work. Technically, that's not quite shadow work, but it's getting close. Active imagination, art therapy, synchronicity awareness. Cognitive integration, this is a belief examination, right? Examining your beliefs. Cognitive restructuring, basically, I don't know. I don't do that much of this really. It's a process of pulling apart your beliefs and your thinking and trying to figure out what is the rationality, or what is the circuitry of your actual thinking. Perspective taking, putting yourself in the other person's shoes, very important. Living in the movie, narrative, life story examination, and reimagining. That's me and Melissa's understanding, living in the movie. You constantly hear me talk about that. I won't go into any of these things in deep right now. Heart-based integration, compassion and heart-based awareness practices, loving kindness towards inner disowned parts and outer human foes. Or our term, the heart is toxic to the virus. That was always our term. Spiritual perception, all spiritual, meditative, yogic, and contemplative practices, those all can go in the category of shadow work. And psychedelic experiencing when safe and in proper set and setting, psilocybin, ayahuasca, ibogaine ceremony, ketamine therapy, other entheogens as appropriate. And so this is the upper left-hand quadrant, mind quadrant of shadow work. And there's more to add to that, but that's the basic version. And I'm not going to go into all the other quadrants today, but I just wanted to that's mainly what people talk about when they talk about shadow work, is upper left-hand quadrant. But then I got body material, somatic experiencing, like Carlos was talking about, the open focus meditation that gets your body to relax. That's in this category here. Where is that? Oh, it must be in here, right? Where is open focus in there? Yeah, open focus meditation, Sarno, TMS protocols. Okay. Eventually, this is going to be out. You got lower left-hand quadrant shadow work. You got shadow work in all the quadrants. And then I've got in here shadow detection questions. You're asked, these are, what qualities in other people trigger the strongest emotional reactions in me? What traits do I judge most harshly in others? What emotions do I most try to avoid feeling? Rage, grief, shame, fear. When I feel morally superior to someone, what part of myself might I be avoiding? What do I secretly fear others discovering about me? Where in my life do I feel chronic resentment? What am I pretending not to know about my own behavior? What roles do I perform in order to maintain approval? Nice person, helper, victim, strong one. When I sabotage myself, what might I actually be protecting? What forms of pleasure, power, or expression do I secretly envy in others? What memories still generate shame or humiliation when recalled? What part of my inner critic sounds like a parent, teacher, or authority figure? What pain have I never allowed myself to fully feel? And then that's upper left-hand quadrant, and then there's questions for all the quadrants. And then there's a chart for shadow trigger. You have a trigger, and then this is the possible shadow material below the trigger. So you can see, guys, that this is a very helpful system map. But it's also kind of cognitive, and it's for thinkers and stuff, and it's for doers, people who want to really put together their own thing. But anyway, so there we go. And I will continue to develop that. Let me take that off and go back to where we were. I'll continue to develop that as we go on, and then there will be a workshop where that will be a segment of the workshop. So coming soon. All right, so anyway, if anyone has any final questions, I think some folks Carlos did, EMDR. Oh, you had an identity collapse in EMDR. It is horrific. You feel like you're going insane. Wow. That's good, Carlos. I'm glad you had that. That's good, man. That needed to happen. Don't recommend it. Well, I don't know how else it's gonna. These. We have to have a strong but flexible identity, right? If your identity is too weak, then, you know, I've had this. This has been my issue. My identity is very flexible, but it hasn't been that strong. And I've had to develop that over years, you know, being a performer and all of that, and then, you know, talking to people and all of this, and then I'm also autodidactic. I've been in so many different professions and areas in life, and hung out with different types of people, and so my identity is pretty flexible, and I don't really even have too much of a whole. I mean, I walk around with long hair, you know, so I kind of look like a musician. But then I don't really talk like a musician or act like a musician. People have a hard time figuring out what is my identity? Who is this guy? Where is he coming from? What is this? I go in the music world, and then they figure out, oh, well, wait a minute, is he, you know, what the hell? Or I go into this, you know, I go into intellectual world, and they're like, oh, he's an artist, and you know, so I'm really crossing over into different roles and having to have a flexible identity. But I haven't had, both of my parents had self-esteem issues, and so I always kind of had inner critic self-esteem issues. And now it's a lot better than it ever was. It's like I can deal with it now. It's not taking me down, but it's still present, right? It doesn't destroy my life, but it definitely still is, you know, and it just gets better every year. I just get better and better. I keep working at it every year. But you don't want to have a really rigid identity. You know, this is who I am. This is what I do. This is where I fit in. This is what my beliefs are. You want to be able to say, okay, you want a flexible identity. When I'm in this situation, this is my identity and I'm using it, and it's flexible. And it can be this over here and this over here. That's how I always kind of had that. So I just had to learn how to live with that. But a lot of people, they have to learn how to actually adopt different, you know, wear different hats and have different feeling states that accompany those different roles, and allow beliefs, like we were saying earlier, to just be vehicles. It's like a car. It just gets you from point A to point B, and then when you don't need to travel, you know, when you need to get it, you go from point A to point B in a car, and then you need to get in a boat, and then you need to get on an airplane, then you need to get in a canoe, and then you need to swim, and you just use different identities, different beliefs to get where you need to go in life. And, you know, in the Jungian understanding, the big S self is what's insinuating or is directing your daimon, is directing your, you know, it's giving you your direction where you need to go. So if it's saying you need to go over here right now for you to feel meaning and purpose and feel good inside and feel creative, then you're going to have to adopt your belief systems and your identity. And then when it's 10, 20 years later, it's saying you need to do something else, well, then you need to adopt a different belief system and a different identity. So that's how we have to do it here. But sometimes it can, those are called dark nights of the soul, or ego ego deaths, and they can be very, very hurtful, obviously. All right, everyone. So thank you guys for hanging out with me Tuesday. And I came on a little bit later today, and I think that worked out. And so this was 7:30 Central. So I think next week I'll go on 7:30. I'll keep going 7:30. Could push it up to 8 maybe, but that gets a little bit too late for me. So I think a 7:30 is going to be what it is. Hi, Shelly. You're welcome. Well, yeah, thanks for checking it out, and you're welcome, Carlos. And it's my pleasure, and I really appreciate you guys coming in here and being with me and being part of this community. And because it's so much better, even if it's just a handful of you guys, it's much better than just talking into the wind. And so having live people on with me is fantastic. And then we get to address your personal issues and all of that to the degree that you want to bring them in. So that's awesome. And it's really the best. It's really what I want to do more than anything, is not just talk theory, but actually work with you. So, and if you know anybody else that you think can benefit from our program, then please bring them in. And the more the merrier. And if you ever have any questions or anything, any subjects you want me to address next week, you can just put them, you can send me a message, or you can put them in the comments after the video is done in YouTube. Just put a comment in there, and I'll see it, and then I'll get to it next week, whatever it is, because I always need to have ideas for what I'm going to do next week, the following week. So there you go. And if anybody came in late, this was a good program today. We talked about complexes and emotional clearing, and we did the 4-quadrant model, and this was a good show today. So I would recommend anybody that came in late to start from the beginning when this is done. And I played an amazing song that Melissa Amari and I wrote that, I think Melissa's performance is just so incredible, called Shedding the Skin, which is basically about what we're talking about here, Carlos. That was played at the very beginning of the show, so check that out. And if you want to listen to Melissa's music, it's at Melissa Mari, M-A-R-I, melissamari.bandcamp.com, or melissamarimusic.com will take you there. If anybody wants to see the movie that I've made about Melissa, watch the trailer. It's at melissamarimovie.com. And if you like what you see, send me a message, and I'll send you the link to the private upload, and you can watch the movie about Melissa. I highly recommend anyone who hasn't seen the movie about Melissa to get to know her. She is our alchemical saint and our model, I think, my model for stoic strength and commitment to the work. So yes. So thank you guys, and thank you, Theo, for hanging out and for participating as always. And I will keep going. Thank you very much. And I will see you guys next week. Have a great week, everyone.